Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Puranamunina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatva Manusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostute Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraika Panaye Jnana Mudraya Krishnaya Gita Amrita Duhe Namaha Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogdha Gopalanandanaha Partho Vatsya Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gita Amritam Mahata Vasudeva Sudam Devam Kamsa Mardhanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Today we will be resuming from verse 13 of the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And before we dive into that verse, let us refresh our memories about what we've been studying so far. From verse 8 through 12, Lord Krishna covered the very important sadhanas for gaining Atmajnana, or knowledge of the self, self-knowledge. He touched on Karma Yoga, specifically when he included this in verse 10, constant even-mindedness in both desirable and undesirable circumstances as a virtue that we need to cultivate. So that's definitely resonates with the description of Karma Yoga given in the second chapter, where Lord Krishna said, Samatvam Yoga Uchyate, which is yoga is even-mindedness. That's the essence of Karma Yoga. Amma also quotes that many times. And bhakti was also covered in verse 11 when he said, unswerving devotion to me through the yoga of non-separation as a virtue that we should cultivate, or a sadhana we could practice. And even jnana, or the path of knowledge, was mentioned in verse 12 when he said, fixity in self-knowledge and observing the goal of knowledge of the truth. This is also a sadhana that we need to follow in order to attain the realization of that truth. These are supplementary sadhanas and virtues that he's guiding Arjuna and indirectly us to focus on as a support for realizing our own true self. So not just these three, karma, bhakti, and jnana, but also he had a long list of 20, including those values and virtues, like humility, ahimsa, which is non-violence, forbearance, rectitude, and so on. And all of these are equally important. It's not that you can choose one. Like humility is kind of easy for me, so I'm just going to stick with that. Or I have more patience than I have humility, so maybe I'll just stick with that. It's not really the intention is all of them need to be cultivated. The virtues and these sadhanas need to be practiced. Because if we don't do that, what's going to happen to our spiritual growth is it will be lopsided. And our spiritual progress will slow down. So let's say you feel more connected with bhakti and you just want to sing bhajans all the time. So you sing bhajans for 2 hours, with all your friends. And then let's say somebody says, oh, those bhajans weren't very good. Then do we get angry? Do we have a reaction? Do we take offense? Then something's wrong. Or if John Doe gets to sing but I don't get to sing, then I'm filled with jealousy and now suddenly I hate John Doe. Or let's say we prefer the scriptures and studying Amma's teachings. So we studied the Gita here for 7 years, or maybe it's been about 8 so far, I can't remember. But what if we develop a superiority complex? Oh, how much of the Gita have you studied? Oh, that's not very much. I've studied this much. Tell me some teaching that you remember. It's very arrogant, right? Or we may do a lot of seva, a lot of karma yoga, but never meditate. Or maybe we get upset when someone won't let us do things the way we want to do. Or we do puja at home every day, with so much devotion, but we have no compassion for the suffering people in the world. All of these can be considered defects or a lopsided kind of approach to spirituality. They reveal an unbalanced approach, but sadly, they're all too common. We see this all the time. And the lack of balance means that we all have critical blind spots somewhere. And the fact that it is a blind spot means we're not aware of it. So the mind will guide us towards one or the other, and then we go towards that because we find it easy, the path of least resistance. But then we get stuck in that, and then we never work on those blind spots that are what we really need to face. And those blind spots are different from person to person. It can be, one person's blind spot will be anger, another one will be jealousy, another one will be lack of confidence, one person will be too much confidence. Some people are hyperactive, some people are lazy, nitpicky, careless. You have all over the gamut, and the all extremes. So on top of that, people who have very good culture, who are humble, polite, and so on, they too there's a chance that they will get stuck on the path at one point for lack of understanding of the scriptures and the Guru's teachings, or Guru Upadesha. Many people are very devout temple goers, but they cannot accept the existence of a realized master in the body, like Amma. So they lose out on that tremendous opportunity. And their virtues may be appreciated by everybody, but if they don't learn from Amma, or a Mahatma realized being, or something written by the ancient rishis at least, understand it, not just chant it, then they will remain confused because they haven't gained any spiritual wisdom. That's another pitfall we have to be careful about. Because when a major life challenge arises, we may be at a loss to find a solution if we don't have that background in the spiritual principles. So these are all reasons why we have to combine all the factors: karma, bhakti, jnanam, and virtues. But it's important to point out that ultimately it is jnana, or the path of knowledge, that, I won't say the path of knowledge, that self-knowledge that directly leads to moksha, to liberation. So we will have to face that someday. We can take our devotion to that level, to the level where there's no difference between me and God. Then we're not far from self-realization. But we have to practice all of these as we go along. That was the review of the previous class, and tonight the main topic is going to be the fourth topic out of 6, which is called the Jnaya, or Jnayam, that which is to be known. That which is to be known. What does he mean by that? It's a rather cryptic name to give the main topic, and I must confess that because it is very profound content tonight, I'm not quite sure how far we're going to get. We'll try to cover the usual 4 verses, but it's rather deep, very deep, and we'll just take it as we go along. But I want to say one thing. This, from the very first verse, you will understand that this topic of the Nyayam, or that which is to be known, that means Brahman, Param Brahman. And if you remember, the very first verse of Amma's 108 names is Om Purna Brahma Surupinye Namaha. So Amma is Purna Brahma Surupini. The essence, or we could say the embodiment of the complete or full Brahman. So when Krishna talks about Param Brahman, in our world, that's Amma. And she is a symbol of that for us. Even though we may not have experienced that she is Brahman, she represents that. She is the representation of that in our lives, if we're an Amma devotee. So you're going to hear a lot of philosophical language, and we're going to hear consciousness and Brahman and all these things, but don't feel like that is a distant topic, because if that is the name we're giving, very first name we're giving Amma, this means that we're learning about our own Guru. And then she says that you and I are one. So we're learning about ourselves, but it's a little easier to think of it as learning about Amma, because we know she's there, beyond. Whereas we don't, associate ourselves in that way. So we're going to learn about Amma tonight. Just that's the main point. Don't get sidetracked by all the philosophical terminology. And we'll begin by entering into verse 13. So you can repeat after me. Nyayam yatat pravakshami yajñatva amritam ashnute anadimat param brahma na sattan na saduchyate. So as always, I'm taking some liberties in manipulating these verses to make it a little easier for us. I shall describe that which is to be known, knowing which one attains immortality. The Supreme Brahman, the beginningless, is said to be neither existent nor non-existent. So it sounds like a koan. And immortality, just to be clear, is obviously not true immortality, because there is no such thing for the body. It's not like the fountain of youth, Ponce de Leon, whoever it was that was looking for that. We're not looking for that. We want to be immortal in the sense that death does not affect us. Death affects the body, that we cannot change. But we can escape from death ourselves. And that is what he means, that you will go beyond death, and the you is not the body. So that's what we're going to find out. What does he mean by that? So first of all, what does Nyayam mean? What does that refer to? It's the first verse, the first word of the verse. So that becomes clear in the middle of the verse that it refers to the Param Brahma, the ultimate reality, the ultimate truth. actually the literal meaning of that word, nyayam, just means that which is an object of knowledge, but we don't take it as that meaning because that would be too literal. We have two levels of meaning for all these words in the scriptures. The literal meaning and then the intended meaning. So the intended meaning is obviously not that it's an object. It's that which is to be known by all people. And here Jnaneshwara has a nice quote. Param Brahma is called that which is to be known simply because it is not securable except through knowledge. Right? Because if it's your own self, you have to know it. You can't obtain it some other way. And once this knowledge is secured, there remains nothing for one to do. That'd be nice, right? What are you doing today? I'm not doing anything. I realized Param Brahma. Nothing else to do. And then he says, once the seeker secures this knowledge, he is able to keep the mundane existence bundled up on the bank of the sea of eternal bliss, and with a dive is merged into that. How's that sound? Any takers? I'm guessing there's a lot of takers. It also means it's optional to learn everything else in life, because the Atman is the only thing that truly needs to be known. So if you know that, you don't need to know anything else. You can learn anything else you want, but that's okay. But you cannot omit this. You have to know the self. So based on our likes and dislikes, we are all free to study whatever we want, and that's what we're doing. But when it comes to Brahman, the ultimate truth, there are no options. It's a must. It may be this birth, it may be 1 billion births from now, which now is probably 1 billion births ahead of where we were before. But we can take another 1 billion lifetimes if we want to, but eventually we will have to know it sometime. What if someone says, well, I'm not interested? Because why is it relevant, and how does it make any difference in my life? I'm always saying we have to be able to tell your average person why spirituality or why these things are relevant. Well, it may not convince them, but we can say that the answer is that only knowledge of truth can bring about all the things that we actually seek in life. We seek fulfillment, peace, bliss, security, fearlessness. But knowledge of the truth happens to be the only thing that gives all of those things directly to us. So we think we get all those things or can obtain them from all of our worldly pursuits, but it's actually knowing the truth of our being that achieves that. It's up to them to believe it or not. When we talk about this deep philosophy, we can't cut any corners, really. But the problem is that, and another problem with the worldly approach is that our day-to-day efforts don't always bring those intended results that we're hoping for. They don't always bring contentment. In fact, many people would say they often bring the opposite. I did all this work, I tried, it could be marriage, it could be kids, it could be work, it could be your parents or anybody. You spend a lot of time working on a relationship and then it falls apart and it ends up becoming miserable. So we made all that effort with the hope of it, the intention of things getting better, and they may get worse. My job may get worse, even though I'm trying to make it better. My, wealth may decrease, even though I'm trying to increase it. And the problem comes from the fact that our actions are not directly influencing those things. As Amma always says, you must have heard it, hopefully, she says there's a multitude of other factors that affect the outcome of our actions. And that's why she says everybody has to pray for grace. We all have to pray for grace. Even she says, Kripa Rakshikanam. She always, prays for grace like she needs it. But it's just to teach us that no matter what, we still have to pray for for grace. The other, these news items that keep coming up, there's this Olympic surfer. You know, I read these articles because they're so profound spiritually. Getting ready to try out for the Olympics. A young woman, and she's supposedly a very fantastic surfer, which is going to be in the Olympics soon. And she was surfing, and one day she got struck by a lightning bolt and dead, right there in the ocean. Can she do anything to control that? Can anybody? No. So the multitude of other factors are not under our control. However, knowledge of Brahman, knowledge of ourself, is entirely up to us. Nobody else can make it happen because it's our very own self. So maybe somebody says, how do you know that Brahman gives all these things like bliss, security, fearlessness? Can you prove it? Well, we don't have to prove it, actually, because the definition of Brahman is simply that, Sat Chit Ananda. You can take it or leave it, but it's worth investigating because there are people who have proven it to be true. You don't have to believe their lives. You can try it in your own life, but the definition of Brahman is Sat Chit Ananda. So infinite existence, awareness, and bliss. So the word itself implies these, and that means that the question is, prove it is like saying, how do you know that the wavelength of the color red is actually 700 nanometers? That's the definition of it. Or prove to me that the frequency of the musical note C is 261 hertz. That's the definition of the note C. So the definition of Brahman is infinite bliss. Take it or leave it. But as you explore that, you will get in contact with it and you can verify your own experience. That's the best way to do it. And if you still are hesitant, you can read about the lives of Mahatmas, saints, and Amma. Like I said, you don't have to look in the past, you look at Amma right now. And that's the most evident proof. This is all for the skeptic. That's why I didn't say Amma at the beginning. But we know from our experience that there are states of being, such as fullness, contentment, peace, etc. So it should be acceptable to define something as the consummation of all of those things. Then why doesn't everybody, if that's the case, why doesn't everybody pursue Brahman, the knowledge of Brahman? Some people will say, if it's so great, why are people running after a Porsche or a BMW instead of Brahman? It's a good question to which we can give various answers. They may be unaware of Brahman. I can promise you that until I met Amma, I never heard of anything called Brahman. Or they may not know how to know Brahman, how to realize Brahman. Another one is that the mind is extrovert by nature. It even says in the Upanishads that by nature the mind has been created with an extroverted or outward-looking nature. So its tendency is not to look inwards. So that means when we try to change that flow of awareness that characterizes the mind, we're swimming upstream, we're going against the flow. So it requires extra effort. Whereas running towards materialism and sense enjoyment is just following the natural flow of the mind. So most people will do that. And the fourth explanation we can give would be sensory objects give pleasure at first, very quickly, right? Sugar, put it in your mouth. Kids come to Amma over and over during the day, and you think, oh wow, they love Amma so much. And then they put their hand out like that. It turns out most of them just want chocolate and Amma. So it's hard to resist that. And as adults, we're all the same. It's just that we hide our, yearning for quick pleasure in a mature personality. So, but those sense pleasures give sorrow later, and they give nothing but sorrow later. So we think when that sorrow comes, oh, I need more sensory stimulation. I need more and higher and more frequent pleasures. But it's not the case. The problem is that the pleasures are pain in delayed pain. You have a little bit of pleasure and then a lot of pain later. So we don't understand that. We think when the pain comes, I need more pleasure. So this is a catch-22 that everybody suffers from. That's another reason why people don't pursue Brahman. But I'm assuming that anybody who's watching this has realized that there's no end to this pleasure-seeking merry-go-round that never stops. And that's why you're here in the Gita class. So profession and success, wealth, possessions, family, children, all these things, none of them put an end to your search for happiness, I'm presuming. If any one of those was the answer to your pursuit, the search should have stopped. It should have ended, but it hasn't. There's something more, something yet to be known, and that is that which is to be known, the Jnayam. If you didn't know, that's what you're looking for. I was looking for it as a senior in college, desperately. The problem was that there was no one there to tell me what I was looking for. I knew I was looking for something, I just didn't know what it was. I thought it was law school, the military, all these different things that I was considering at the time. And then when I found Amma, I started to get the picture. So it should be clear by now that the self is not an object of knowledge, right? We talked about that a few minutes ago. Brahman means the same thing as the Atman, but from a different standpoint. So I say my self is the Atman. And then when we say the sum total of all the Atmas, figuratively speaking, is Brahman. So from the sum total of the whole universe, we would just call it Brahman. But from the standpoint of the ignorant person who is trying to realize that, we would say it's the Atma. So from the standpoint of the individual, it's Atma. From the standpoint of the sum total, it's Brahman. There is no difference. There is no sum total of Atma, actually. There's only one Atma, there's only Brahman, and they're the same thing. It's just a question of where you stand now. And that's why we use the word realize, because it isn't an object, a separate object. Just like you look and search for your glasses and you finally realize they're on top of your head. You're searching for your car keys, you realize they're in your pocket. That kind of realization. So in that sense, it is that what is to be known. If you're searching for your keys, the keys are what are to be known in your pocket, like that. And the fruit of this knowledge is what? He says immortality. Here, immortality signifies being free from samsara. There's no death for you, that means it's moksha. Fullness, fulfillment, fearlessness. Shankaracharya says here, to rouse the attention of the listener, the fruit of such knowledge is indicated. So it's kind of, they call it palastuti. It's to get the reader or the listener interested and attracted to that topic. And then he continues to say, there is no more death for the knower of it. So if you know Brahman, there's no more death. If people want death, that's another story, but I think most people get the picture. Then from the second line of this verse onwards, Krishna begins to define that ultimate reality, the Jnayam, the Param Brahma. And that topic continues up to verse 18. So you're going to have to be patient with me. A lot of very deep philosophy, and at times you might get lost, but whenever you get lost, bring your focus back to Amma. How is this an explanation of Amma, a description of Amma? Krishna is actually painting a picture of Amma, you could say. And each claim he makes is a stroke in that picture. So think of it that way, then it won't become boring. And what Krishna says in these verses is the essence of the Upanishads. So some people say they read the Upanishads and they feel it's boring. Well, Krishna has put it in a different way where it's not. It's not so abstract. It's not so difficult. It's a very subtle topic, like we saw in chapter 2, verses 12 to 25. You can brush up on those at home if you want to. It's a subtle topic like that. And that was in the chapter 2, it was referring more to the Atma from the individual perspective. Now it's talking about Brahman, we would say samashti, the totality. So the same thing viewed from different standpoints. Now, to approach that word, Param Brahma, it's a very tricky process because people will always ask, what is Brahma? What is Param Brahma? And if you're susceptible to traps and you want to jump off a cliff, you start talking about it. And then you get yourself in trouble. So if you ask Amma, I think she will be very, careful about how she responds. But I mean, the definition that we would read typically is the ultimate reality to be known. The ultimate reality. Then the next question is, what is that, right? So if we look at each of these words, Brahma or Brahman means infinite, and Param means free from all limitations. So it's the biggest, which is free from all limitations. Even a common person who doesn't have any education, like in the days when Krishna was teaching this, there were so many people who couldn't even read and understand anything, philosophically. But if you say Param Brahma, it's a big, huge thing that is beyond everything. That's good enough for beginners. And we're beginners, but we're going to go beyond that too. It's free from limitations in what sense? Well, we would say in 3 senses. Space-wise, time-wise, and in terms of properties or you could say attributes. So it is unlimited space-wise, time-wise, it is unlimited, and it is not limited by any attributes or properties, which means it has none. Any property or attribute you project on something or you claim, it limits your existence or something's existence. So, but because it is devoid of all attributes and properties, how do you explain it? It has been a tremendous puzzle for people for eons. It cannot be located, it cannot be produced. Like, here's a prototype of Brahman. This is what it looks like, but it's a little different because it's like that and this. But this is basically it. You can't do that either. So all these things, if you say it looks like a table or a chair, it's all delimiting factors and it'll never work. So they don't apply to the Brahman. And due to this very subtle nature that is very difficult to define, the Parabrahman has been described in the Upanishads via very subtle and very careful methods. And this is the methodology that Krishna is following. So we have to explain that whole methodology because you're going to see it, over the next series of verses over and over again. And you're going to, if you want to understand the content here, you're going to have to grasp those concepts. So this is why, this is the statutory warning. It is neither existent nor non-existent. Oh, then why are we even talking about it if it's neither existent or non-existent, right? Okay, hold on. Before you get a headache. Most things that, anything that we know about in this world has to be one or the other. Either it's existent or it's not existent. You could say, well, it's a unicorn rabbit. Well, that doesn't exist, so that's okay. So, so it either exists or it doesn't. It cannot be neither, and it cannot be both. So that existence, so-called existence, is the existence that we know about, which is relative. It only has a relative meaning in our world. So here, Krishna is talking about absolute existence and absolute. He's talking about absolute existence and he's not talking about absolute non-existence because there is no such thing. He's talking about absolute existence. But there's a reference otherwise. We'll see. So the discrepancy is that of empirical, or we could call it relative reality, versus ultimate reality. So an empirical or relative reality can be temporary. It exists today, and it doesn't exist tomorrow. So I can give you a very clear example with a Amma story. I remember it was probably in the late 90s sometime, and we had been traveling with Amma through the US, and then I think it was one of those times when I came back with Amma, the same flight or something. And when we got there, we found that the darshan hut had been demolished. You know, when you read in Amma's Awakened Children, in the biography, there's this talking about, probably not so much the biography, more like Awakened Children, early volumes. There's the darshan hut, you know, which was a long, narrow hut. And so many memories and so many beautiful episodes took place there. And one summer, you know, at the end of the summer when Amma came back, it was gone. And he called somebody and found, he said, who demolished it? And then the guy came and he was standing in front of Amma cowering. And then she said, why did you do it? And he says, Amma, you told me to do it, right? And she said, I didn't tell you anything. And he said, oh, and he started crying, and then she said, okay, it's okay. You know, she was testing him, obviously. And it turned out that she had said it, but she was expecting a confirmation. You know, when Amma tells you, you have to confirm multiple times before you're really sure that she wants that done, especially a big thing like that. So it seems that he forgot to double check with Amma and went ahead with it. But even the darshan hut, it was there before we went, and when we got back, it was gone. Something so powerful, full of Amma's Shakti, that hut was demolished. So this is relative existence. It doesn't exist anymore, right? And Shantamritananda exists today, maybe not tomorrow. All of us, Amma says, even the next breath is not in our hands. So this body, when we say Shantamritananda or your own name, we're not pointing to the Atma, we're pointing to the body. This may go in the middle of the satsang. I'm not saying that as making mockery of it. It's truth. It's the truth. So how come Param Brahma is exempt from this rule that anything may go away at any time? Obviously, it's because it's not relative reality, it's the ultimate reality. When we say something is existent on the empirical level, it is something that we are illumining through our consciousness. When we left Amritapuri to go on the tour, we saw the darshan hut. You know, we witnessed it. And that was because the consciousness was illuminating the existence of the darshan hut. It can be anything, a table, a car, you know, a person. But that consciousness cannot be illumined by anything else. There's only one consciousness. There's only one illuminating principle. So existence and non-existence on the relative level has to be illuminated by consciousness. But consciousness itself is self-luminous. So it doesn't need another principle to illumine itself. It's our own experience all the time. We're going to talk about that more. So consciousness, which is common to both empirical existence and non-existence. That's the important thing. It illumines the presence of something and the absence of it. The existence of something, and the non-existence of it. And that consciousness that illumines all the relative existence and non-existence is the absolute reality. How can something that is relative verify something else that is relative, right? It has to be ultimate to be able to verify that. And don't ask, is there any absolute non-reality? Because that's a contradiction in terms. If it's absolute, then it has to have existence. Once somebody came to Amma during darshan. He spoke Amma's language. He was a young man, and I think sort of a agnostic or perhaps even atheistic or very doubting nature. And he kept asking Amma all kinds of pointed questions, to which she gave brilliant answers. But he in the end, he said, but Amma, how do you know that consciousness exists? And then Amma said, who wants to know? And he says, I want to know. I'm the one asking the question. It's for me. And Amma said, you just proved your question. You just gave the answer to your own question. How do you know that consciousness exists? Who wants to know? I want to know. So if there's an I that wants to know, then that's proof of consciousness. It's like saying, you see 1,000 photos and then you ask somebody, how do you know these were taken with a camera? Well, the photo is proof of the camera, right? No, I don't accept the fact that there's a camera. It's a silly argument. The existence of a photo is proof of the camera. The existence of your experience, your consciousness, is proof that it exists. But everything else in the world, it has only relative existence, including the entire universe. Remember, after some trillions of years, this whole universe is dissolved in the pralaya, the grand dissolution of the universe. So if the universe has relative existence, that means everything in it does. And the only thing that transcends that is the transcendent itself, and that has a name, which is Brahman. That's all. To summarize this part of the verse, Jnanadev adds something nice here. He says, all talk of existent or non-existent is silenced with the attainment of knowledge. In other words, don't argue about it. When you attain knowledge, you'll know. And there, the power of thinking comes to a dead halt. Just as the element of earth abides in the respective forms of earthen jars, etc., so abides eternally the Supreme Spirit in all things and is omnipresent. So he takes the don't make a big fuss about it type of standpoint on that verse. So why does Krishna use that expression, it is said? Because, like Amma, he's humble. And he's an avatar just like Amma. So people that, if you already know you're the king, why do you have to say, hey, I'm the king, listen to what I have to say? The king knows, or the queen knows, that they are the supreme ruler. They don't have to take credit for themselves. They'll say that they give credit to the Upanishads or the previous sages, of which there must have been thousands, many, countless sages. So he gives them the credit. He doesn't need it. But as it turns, now today everybody gives credit to Krishna because of that. Now we'll move on to the next verse, verse 14. Sarvatapani padam tat sarvatokshi shiro mukam sarvatha srutimalloke sarvam avritya tishtati. Very few changes here. It has hands and feet everywhere, with eyes, heads, and mouths everywhere, with ears everywhere. That stands pervading everything in the universe. The word used is actually world, but that word loka often means the whole universe. So we can take it as the universe. This verse takes it a step further from the last verse. The illumination mentioned before that we talked about is simply a way of expressing the pure consciousness principle. And that is otherwise known as Chit. We said Sat Chit Ananda. So when you hear that word Chit, that means consciousness, awareness, Bodha sometimes. All these things that we read, often they mean the same thing. So don't get confused. And also, Chit is sometimes interchangeable with knowledge, that word absolute knowledge, God realization. And it's in that sense, it's also equivalent to jnana. So you have to look based on the context, which meaning we have to take. And because of that, we have to make the same differentiation between relative and absolute consciousness and knowledge. We just talked about relative existence and absolute existence. Now we're going to talk about relative consciousness and relative knowledge. So relative knowledge and ignorance are what we might refer to in like a scholarly arena. Are you, do you know about what we say, like relativity physics or nanophysics? Do you know anything about that? No, I'm completely ignorant about nanophysics. That's the truth. So that's relative ignorance or knowledge. And then there's relative consciousness as well, which is either you're awake or you're asleep, dreaming, whatever it may be. So these relative states of knowledge and consciousness are subject to coming and going. That's the important thing. Maybe I don't know about nanophysics now, but I can study and learn about it. And maybe I knew something and I forgot it. Or, I'm conscious now, but maybe when I'm sleeping, it won't be the case. So but at the same time, just like before, both states cannot exist at the same time. That's the important thing. You cannot be both conscious and unconscious. You cannot have knowledge and be ignorant at the same time of a particular subject. So whether we have knowledge or consciousness, or whether we lack knowledge or consciousness, are those illumined by something? Can we perceive those? This is an important question to ask ourselves. Do I know whether I know something, or am I ignorant of my ignorance? I'll give you an example. Do you know English? If you're watching this, I assume that you at least know some English, right? And you would say, yes, I know English. I'm fluent, or I know this much or that much. And so you say, yes, I know. Then I say, okay, how about Swahili or Yonaguni, which is a language on a remote Japanese island spoken by about 500 people. Let's go with Yonaguni. Do you Yonaguni language? Never even heard of it, right? So we would say, I don't know that language. Because we know that we don't know Swahili, we don't know Yonaguni language. If we didn't know that we don't know, we would say, I don't know whether I know Swahili or not. Maybe I know Swahili. I can't tell you whether I know it or not, right? I know I don't know it. So that means that something is illuminating my ignorance. I'm conscious of my ignorance, right? So that means there's another level of knowledge that illumines the absence of knowledge. This is another way of revealing the consciousness that cannot be explained in words. Since you cannot describe Brahman through words, you have to use examples like this. I know that I know, and I know that I don't know. So there's something illuminating that. That's Brahman, that's consciousness. So these simple examples show that our relative knowledge and ignorance are revealed due to the illuminating power of Chaitanya, awareness, the Atma, Brahman, whatever you want to call it. And that is absolute existence. Again, absolute knowledge. So the verses to follow are all going to follow this kind of logic, like it or not. We're going to go through all these so that we get clear about them. And this is the methodology that Krishna is going to use to guide us through that process. And it's a method called Adhyaropa Apavada. This is the Sanskrit word. Adhyaropa Apavada, which is used in the Upanishads all over the place to reveal Brahman, the supreme truth. You can't just take a photo. This is the supreme truth. Unless you look at Amma's photo. Yes, we just did it. We're cheating. But if you want to know who Amma really is, then you have to learn it properly. It's cheating to just point at Amma because you didn't really understand what that meant, right? So we have to go in and understand what that means. All words are relative in nature. And the word big to a 3-year-old means a 10-year-old. And to an adult, it means the water tower of MA Centers, Chicago. To the water tower, what is big? Like the Himalayas, So everything's relative in nature. So the ancient rishis knew that was the problem that they had. And so they would use a word that was kind of getting you close, but it had one defect, that it was that limited its existence. So you use something and you superimpose that on top of Brahman temporarily, say, it's kind of like this, and then you say, but without that, And then they remove that prop, they negate it, and then you are hopefully left with a more transcendental perspective of what Brahman is. So Adhyaropa is the introduction of something together with Brahman, and Apavada is the negation of that or removal of that thing that you just introduced. So we'll get into some examples of that in a moment. But it's a process of negating all these things that don't fit. That's basically what it is. You're saying it's like this but not that. It's like this but not that. So that's why you're saying in Sanskrit it's na iti, na iti, na iti. And that becomes neti, neti. So that's why you may hear Amma when she's talking about deep philosophical topics, you'll hear her say neti, neti, something or other. This is the path that the rishis have used. And so she uses it also. This morning during the live stream, she was doing that also with Shakti. She was doing that with Niranjan. Kunya Niranjan. She's using the neti neti method, but in a very playful and motherly way. So it's much faster that way, but they didn't have Amma at the time of the Upanishads. So we're very lucky. We should be very grateful for having that expedited growth path through her. So after negating all the things that don't fit, we slowly get closer to the essence of what it is, and we realize that it's what remains is the I, that I, the consciousness of who I am. That's all that remains. This is the goal that the rishis have. And so in the Upanishads it says it's bigger than the biggest. And then right as you're trying to wrap your head around that statement, it says, and it's smaller than the smallest. And that's when you start to get a migraine, perhaps. But the Upanishads continue. And when all concepts are destroyed, what is left is the conceiver, right? You destroy all concepts, what remains is the conceiver, which is consciousness. And that is not a concept, it's our experience every second of the day. So Krishna is going to use that. He's going to say, this is not real, this is not real. And it holds, he uses it in many ways. He's going to talk about something which is concrete, and then he's going to remove that and make it an inconcrete, a more abstract concept. And ultimately, all relative terms are going to have to be negated to reach the absolute. More about that comes up in the next verse, following verses. But just remember that all these relative terms fail to reveal what is beyond language. So, it's a real fix that the rishis have been in, and Amma is in also. And the absolute is just beyond all of the usual instruments of understanding. That's why the Upanishads say things like this, that which is not visible, graspable, member of a clan, has no caste, no eyes, no ears. Without sound, touch, form, and destruction. So it has no form, it cannot be destroyed. Well, what in the world is it? It is other than the known and also beyond the unknown. There eyes do not go, nor words, nor the mind, nor concepts, from which words recoil. It's so cryptic that unless you're living with that master and getting your doubts clarified and diving into that and meditating on it all day, it will take a very long time. So the Gita serves it to us in a more condensed way, and also we supplement that with Amma's teachings. So, like I said, we're very fortunate to be here with Amma, even though it's Kali Yuga. Maybe that's why she came down, to make up for all the difficulties that seekers face in this dark age of materialism. So what is that Upanishadic teaching, a technique in the first place? So the Absolute is revealed indirectly first. There's an indirect introduction of it with some other thing, connected to it. So it's introduced, Brahman is introduced with some relative thing in the picture. Then in the next step, they drop that relative reference point, and what remains is the Absolute, like I said. And that's the Adhyaropa Apavada method, and it's been used for countless years. We're going to see how he uses that. In Western translations, sometimes they call it superimposition and sublation. Superimposition and sublation. That might be even harder to understand. It's sometimes Victorian English, so don't get hung up on it. We struggle to understand that formless, so we superimpose some name and form on it, and then we take it away, and you're left with the formless. And now is where we get to have a concrete or a familiar example. Light. Light is the best example, actually. It gets used over and over again. If someone takes you in an empty room and says, "Show me the light," you'll say, like, "What light? There's nothing in here." But the fact is that the light is pervading that room, right? We just can't see the light, the photons. That's the limitation of our sense organs. So we cannot see the light on its own. But if we use a prop, we can see it. And the usual example given is your hand, because you can see it. So I'm seeing my hand. And then if someone says, "What do you see?" you might say, "Oh, I'm seeing my hand." And you seeing anything else? No, just my hand. Then what if Amma says to you, "Well, what about if it's dark? What if it's nighttime? Pitch dark. The moon is not even out." Then what do you see? Well, you say, "I'm not going to see anything if it's pitch dark." You go into a closet or something like that. Oh, so what are you seeing now? Well, I guess what I'm seeing is I'm seeing my hand being illumined by something. So you're seeing light plus your hand. And you move your hand away, and then you have to look all the way across the other side of the room to see something, right? Because you can't see anything in between. And then you see the wall, or you see something else. So then you're seeing the wall plus light, or light plus the wall. That's a better way of putting it. So the idea is we're looking at it as light plus an object. And that is what is meant by adhyaropa. You take something which has no limitation, light, and you refer to it with a prop of some kind, like your hand. Now, it looks like the light is limited to my hand because that's how I'm appreciating it, or that's how I'm perceiving the light, is through this prop of the hand. But is light really limited to the hand? Of course not. But that's what it looks like. So then you say, okay, what about the light when you remove the hand? And then you say, well, I mean, it's everywhere. It must be everywhere because wherever there's a prop or something for it to reflect on, I can see the light. So even though my eyes cannot conceive of the light everywhere, now I can understand that, it's just my hand that is reflecting it. So it's everywhere, and human beings can perceive it wherever there's an object. So that helps us understand the all-pervasiveness. And actually, so it's very close to, you could say, consciousness as a absolute reality, because light, especially in the old days, there was only sunlight. Everything came from that. So that sunlight is eternal in one sense, relatively speaking. And it's all-pervasive, it's reality. So it's not like a fire that's going to go out if you pour water on it, right? So it's the best example for us to understand these concepts. And then the apavada part, the removal of that is saying, removing your hand and realizing that, you, even without the hand being there, that light can be there, can exist. So for us, a little more personal experience would be, you go for Amma's darshan. She hugs you and she says something in your ear, and you feel that love, you feel that presence just because you're in her arms. It's a physical action, but that feeling lingers afterwards, right? You feel her presence. Even afterwards, you feel so touched by her. There's something that remains afterwards, even though you're not in her physical presence. And then even now, during COVID times, when you cannot go to see Amma and she cannot come to see her children, there may be times where we feel her presence around us, within us. And it's non-physical now. It's just a subtle presence of Amma in our life. So that is an example of how you can have that same all-pervasive experience without her physical body. So it's another analogy where you show something that looks like it's contained within this beautiful, adorable, captivating, bewitching 5-foot form, when it's not actually limited by that. We think it is. But when we experience that it is limitless, then we realize, yes, Amma's everywhere. She's within me, she's in the squirrel, she's in the butterfly. We may have a little fleeting epiphany about something like that. And don't take those lightly. Just remember that it's a sign that Brahman is everywhere. And Amma is that Brahman. So in the context of this section of the Gita, instead of light, we would replace that with consciousness. And that is Nyayam, that is Param Brahma. We can't see consciousness, but it becomes recognizable when associated with a body, a live body, not a dead body. Just as the pure light becomes the shining principle in the hand, the pure chit, the pure consciousness becomes, we talked about it before, it becomes the chitabhasa. Chitabhasa. Abhasa means reflection, and chit is consciousness. So the reflection of consciousness in what? The physical body? No, the subtle body. Because the physical body is still there after a person dies, right? But that subtle body has left. So the reflection of consciousness is not there anymore. So the consciousness reflected in the subtle body is equivalent to the light reflecting on the hand. And then you remove that, and it's like you're removing the subtle body from a person's body, and now you would see a dead body, but then you have to understand at that time that that consciousness has not died. That subtle body of the jiva is still there. We just can't see it. And they may be, most likely they'll be born again in another body. And once they get another subtle body, we'll be able to perceive that jiva through the subtle body. We talked about that a little bit. We won't repeat all that stuff. So we would say that I have never experienced Brahman. I think we feel like that. But when we feel like that, or when we say that, it's just like saying I have never experienced light. Because we've never seen light, pure light. It's impossible for us. We cannot see photons. But we're always seeing light through its reflection and all these things in the world. So that is a wrong statement saying that we have never experienced pure light. We should understand that it's always there, and it's equally same with consciousness. Now, there's one more step in this methodology. The general conclusion we make is that consciousness is limited, and then we attribute that limitation to the body, right? We attribute the limitation of the body to consciousness. So we have lots of consciousnesses around us, yours, mine, everybody's, the dogs, the cats, and so it is not only limited, but it's divided into infinite number of beings. That's why that confusion that we have is why Amma has to sing this song, Omkara Divya Puruli, to us. She says, you are the I in me, and I am the you in you. The feeling of difference is due to the blindness of ignorance. In truth, nothing is separate. This ignorance that we have is why we need this methodology that Krishna has. He needs to remove that prop each time so that we remember that it is not, consciousness is not limited by the body or anything. So it's our ignorance of that that's making us feel like we're separate. So in this verse, where it's taking a long time, like I warned you, the next part of the verse is, it has hands and feet everywhere. This is another example. So we are now projecting or superimposing hands and feet on Brahman. This is definitely cheating, right? Brahman is supposed to be the absolute truth. So it doesn't have any hands and feet. But just forgive Krishna for attributing those to Brahman for a moment. So when pure awareness is associated with the body, it becomes the jiva, and that is another meaning for chitabhasa. The jiva, it could be a dog, it could be any kind of living being, and the hands and feet can be any kind. It can be animal, it can be butterfly, hands and feet, so to speak, like that. And then he also talks about heads and eyes and all that. So it doesn't matter which form it is, it has a subtle body, because it's a living thing, it's a sentient being, and that is reflecting consciousness, which is all pervasive. So the difference is that we can only see that where there's a subtle body, and subtle bodies are only exist in jivas, in sentient beings. So I'm a sentient being, you're a sentient being. I say I have 2 hands, 2 legs, and you say, oh yeah, I have 2 legs and 2 hands also. So we say, oh wow, there's all these living beings, and there's so many pairs of legs and hands. It must be 7.86 billion pairs of hands and arms, and that's all Brahman. It's like, it's not a millipede, it's a billipede, it's a gigantic cosmic billipede, like a millipede, some like monstrous being is what it seems like, with so many billions of eyes and heads and mouths. So what kind of a thing is this? But don't forget, this is only the first part of the method. He's superimposing these things on Brahman because hands and feet are something that we're used to. Okay, I can relate to Brahman if it has hands and feet, right? And it has everybody's hands and feet. Wow. So then what do I have to do to understand the real meaning? Because Vedanta, Advaita, is not going to accept the idea that pure consciousness has hands and legs. So what was just described was that of the jiva, and which means the Brahman associated with the body. That's all it is, a jiva. And when you refer to that same Brahman associated with the total bodies in the whole universe, it has another name, which is Virad. You may have heard that. It's spelled V-I-R-A-T, and the T has a little dot underneath if you want to be really particular about it. That is the way it is expressed with all the bodies in the world. So so you call Brahman associated with an individual is the jiva. Brahman associated with all the jivas from the totality, that's called Virad. What is Brahman associated with no body? Brahman, right? So you can say, oh, all these living beings, they have this thing that makes them alive, that gives them that life, that consciousness. And it's all the same one. And then doesn't need a body also. So then what is it if it doesn't have a body? It's simply the consciousness. That's the idea. He's trying to guide us to that. He gets you up to that point and then says, okay, now what you tell me what it is. Because it has to be realized. It cannot be taught specifically. So there he says, there that stands pervading everything in the universe. That is the part where he removes the limitation. Because he has hands and feet, but he hasn't removed that limitation. Now he removed it by saying, it stands pervading everything in the universe. That's what we need to hear to understand that it is not limited to the butterfly form or to the bird form or the zebra form or whatever it may be, or human form, of course. Jnanadev says here, it, in other words, the Supreme Brahman, pervades the universe just as the sky pervades all space, or just as the thread pervades the entire linen in the form of checkered cloth, right? He says very clearly, form of. Doesn't mean that the linen is affected by the checkered cloth. The thread is affected by the checkered cloth. It pervades everything, that form. Or just as liquidity dwells in the water in the watery form, right? That form is secondary. The liquid is what matters. Or just as light dwells in the lamp form. You see, the essence of a light is light. The essence of a lamp is light. So we allow the lamp form, but what we're really interested in is the light. And light dwells in it in that way. Or just as the fragrance of camphor exists in camphor, in the camphor form. So it has a form and it expresses something through that, but the fragrance of the camphor has a form initially. Or just as actions dwell in the body, in the body form. So the form doesn't really matter. There's something that gives an essence to that, and that's what he's getting at. So in chapter 11, all the arms and legs and heads belong to Krishna. Remember? Vishwarupa Darshana as the universal form. Then in the first half of this verse, he says that Brahman now owns all the hands and legs. And then the final step of that concept is that all pervasiveness removes the wrong understanding that Brahman is only where living beings are. He's only in the caterpillar, he's only in the bird, he's he's in the worm, but he's not in the dirt next to the worm. That's the wrong concept, because when you use hands and legs and heads and everything, it seems like it's only there in sentient beings, right? That's a very common confusion that people get. But it's not in between. Between me and you, there's no Brahman here, right? That's a false notion. He's going to talk about that later. If it is pervading everything in the universe, it must be the invisible consciousness in between all bodies, right? So that's when we use the light analogy. It's also in between all of the crutches, those props we use to reveal its existence. So, just like we cannot perceive pure light without a physical form, we cannot perceive pure consciousness without some kind of form. And in the case of pure consciousness, that form is not the body per se, it is the subtle body. Okay, let's move on to verse 15. Sarvendriya Gunabhasam Sarvendriya Vivarjitam Asaktam Sarva Britchaiva Nirgunam Guna Bhoktracha. So this one needs, I felt it needed more adaptation. So this is what I came up with. Though shining through the functions of all the senses, it is free from the senses, unattached, yet sustaining all, devoid of gunas, in other words, properties, attributes, devoid of gunas, yet their experiencer. Okay, I'll read it once more, a little bit faster. Though shining by the functions of all the senses, it is free from the senses, unattached, yet sustaining all, devoid of gunas, properties, yet their experiencer. So, we need to understand how Brahman, or pure consciousness, shines by the sensory functions, or through them. When we use our sense of hearing, we hear sounds. But we know from the explanation that Vedanta gives about creation, both the objects as well as that the organ, the inner organ, not the physical organ of like your ear, they talk about the power of hearing. Because you may have you may have ears but can't hear anything. So it's not the ears that matter, it's the power of hearing that matters. So when they talk about the sense of hearing, they're not talking to the ears. There's a subtle power that dwells, in there that is what counts. So even that indriya, that organ of hearing, is considered to be inert. The objects are obviously inert. So they cannot illuminate anything. Right? They need the consciousness. The consciousness is the only thing that can illuminate something that we see, or we can also say it's illuminating what we hear, it's illuminating what we taste, and so on. So all of the organs of perception are inert. According to Vedanta, according to Advaita, the creation process, everything in this, remember we went through that at the beginning, this whole world, this whole universe is basically inert. There's only one thing that enlivens it, and that is the jnaya, the consciousness. So consciousness is what is illuminating it through those organs of perception. That's the point. So he's using the organs of perception as a indirect way to reveal consciousness. It's a pretty effective method. So it doesn't matter what we see or hear, it's the same consciousness that's illuminating all of them. We might think I have a ear consciousness and I have a nose consciousness and a mouth consciousness, but because they go in different holes, right? So how can it be the same thing perceiving it? But it is. It's just the one consciousness. And so seeing everything is the same way. So it doesn't matter what form and which sense organ, the illuminator is one. And we will also obviously think that the other person's, sense organs are completely different. So it's associated, in this example, this metaphor, consciousness is being associated not with like a person, necessarily, but with sense organs. That's the point. So it's associated with smelling, touching, tasting, etc. And it is evident in every experience. Like let's say you're asleep and somebody puts a wonderful pie in your mouth, or you might wake up and taste it, but let's say you're anesthetized, and you're not going to wake up, and someone, puts the best food in your mouth. Doesn't mean anything to you. It's useless because the consciousness at that point is not available because you're anesthetized. It's a little bit extreme example, but also, let's say you're sleeping, you're deep asleep, and someone puts $1 million, dress on you or a $50,000 dress on you. It doesn't mean anything. It's no use because you're not. It's not available for perception at that time. So the consciousness is what determines it, and on the absolute level, it's there, but not always through the sense object, not through the sense organs always, right? If you're in deep sleep, it's not available that way. It exists, but in the deep sleep state, we are not aware of it. We can prove that it exists when we wake up. That's another topic. But we might then, because we're talking about these sense organs, we might confuse consciousness to be limited by their sensory activities. So, to avoid that possibility, now we need the second half of this method, which is apavada, to negate any dependency that might be projected or misattributed to the senses, to consciousness. So in the Upanishads, we have verses like, devoid of hands and feet, he is quick and grasps. If you don't have a hand or feet, how can you be quick or grasp something? Eyeless, he sees. Earless, he hears. So these are all, they seem to be contradictory statements, but it's the same thing. It goes through the eyes. It doesn't have eyes per se, but it is what enlivens the eye and illuminates everything that the eye is perceiving. So to clarify all these things and make it easier to understand, that when he says they're free from the senses, what does that mean? He says, the sky appears round when enclosed in a round pot, or appears four-cornered when seen from the interior of a house, which has four corners. But those round and square forms are not of the sky. They're not of space, akasha, itself. In that way, Supreme Brahman appears to undergo transmutations, yet in reality is never so affected. It's a very easy way of thinking of it. So light and space are the common analogies used. You have the pot space, and then you think you're dividing up space. You're not limiting space at all. It's all pervasive. It's everywhere, and you think that you have your pot space, but it's not. It's all one space. So there's no limitation on it just because of a form. Same thing goes for consciousness, for Brahman. So that way, if one of our sense organs gets damaged, we will understand that it has nothing to do with the consciousness, with the real I. The people may identify with their body so much that when something happens to it, they think that something happened to me. That's when we have to remember Vedanta. Let's say we lose our hearing, or we lose the faculty of sight. It's not me, it's not the Atma. I was borrowing it until now. It was a loaner, actually. Now I'm giving it back. So it doesn't affect who I truly am. And that holds true for death as well. That's the ultimate end of all of the sensory functions for that body. So the sense organs can no longer manifest consciousness through in any way. And also the subtle body is part of the sensory organs are part of the subtle body. So when the subtle body leaves, there's definitely no more manifestation of the consciousness in that body. And unattached, sustaining all, he says. The analogy that's commonly used here is gold and the gold ornaments. So like gold is the substratum of all the ornaments, and it lends its existence to all the ornaments, Brahman is the substratum of everything in this whole universe, giving existence to everything. So before it was consciousness, now we're talking about existence, because we cannot perceive that consciousness in everything, right? That's our problem, the limitation of our perception. So in the first half of the verse, he was talking about awareness. Now, with sustaining all, he's talking about sat, or existence. But when Krishna says that Brahman sustains everything, it sounds like a, I don't know, like a foundation of a building, and so that's definitely going to be affected by the building. It has a shape and it has to support that, so it has to be made out of something like that. We may think that whatever happens to these things in the world, that will affect Brahman. So he has to negate that possibility too, that possibility of our misunderstanding also, by saying that Brahman is detached. So it supports everything, but it's not involved. Like the sun. Sun supports everything on the whole planet. But it doesn't come down here and tell people what to do and make them do it. Amma says that a robber may use the light to rob somebody, and a doctor will use light to save somebody's life. So it's not the sun's fault that they use the light in that way. And another example is that even though we never think about it, space is the foundation for everything. Can you imagine what would happen if we didn't have space sustaining us? Nothing would be here. But the space doesn't participate. It's not part of all these things that we're doing. It's just witnessing everything. So it's through these kind of analogies we can understand it a little bit better. And then he says, so another way of looking at it about how Brahman is unattached and not affected by things is a very Advaitic response to such a question, how is Brahman not affected? And that is because Brahman is real and the world is an illusion. It is unreal. Amma usually doesn't use that response to people because she is focused on, the suffering people in the world. Because when you have that oneness with all beings, you will definitely feel compassion for them, and compassion will always overflow in the form of selfless action. So she doesn't say, "Oh, this world is all just an illusion," but there are some texts that regard the world in that way. For people who are really advanced. It's not for us though. Amma's way is to say, yes, it may be Maya, it may be an illusory world, but the suffering is real for those people. For them it's real. So we should have the compassion to go out there and help them. And we also benefit from that spiritually because it's sadhana. So this is the last part of this verse is, he says, devoid of attributes, yet they're experiencer. So if you're devoid of attributes, how can you experience them? Well, this is another pair of statements that have to be looked at from the standpoint of that same methodology. Actually, the first part is the experiencer. So when you say Brahman is the experiencer, it's a superimposition, because if he is the one who is experiencing it, that means he's the subject, and then there's an object that Brahman is enjoying. So there's duality, a little bit of duality there, right? So that is not really allowed, that duality, but he's bringing it there as an example because we know what it's like to experience things. That's what our life is all the time. We're experiencing things. But then he says, they're experiencer of the gunas, attributes. That's the point. What does the gunas mean here? What does it mean here? What does those attributes mean here? It actually means the whole world, because that's what everything is made out of. I think it came up earlier in the Gita. This entire world is made up of the gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. So when we talk about gunas, it means everything. So Brahman experiences everything in this world, is what he's saying. How can that be? Because that means it's in the body and it's experiencing it. So again, it's limited, right? So we have to be careful that we don't make that mistake of thinking of it as being limited by the body. So if it's the subject, that means it's not the object. If it's the experiencer, it's not the experienced. That's the mistake we'll make, right? So it becomes limited in our mind, and it should not be limited if it's truly Brahman. So he has to take one more step and make us drop all those ideas of limitation by saying it's devoid of attributes. So what is, let's say I'm aware of different people. I'm aware of a man, I'm aware of a woman, I'm aware of a tree, I'm aware of food, and so I'm partaking in them also. I'm talking with somebody, I'm eating the food, I'm watching something, Amma's video or whatever, right? So I'm experiencing that. And that's supposed to be the Brahman, but it's like I am having different experiences of different things. So it looks like it's split up, it's divided up, depending on what the object is. So he says, no, it has no attributes. There's no such thing as man consciousness or woman consciousness or food consciousness or video consciousness. It's all consciousness. So he removes all those attributes that could be mistakenly projected onto consciousness. And what we're left with is simply consciousness. So it experiences everything, but it doesn't accrue any attributes as a result of that. In other words, it's the consciousness that helps us enjoy things as jivas, as individuals. But the consciousness itself is always the same. And we are very confused about that because we think, oh, now I'm going to go do this because I like it. That experience is what I like, but it's really just the consciousness revealing different things to us. I think this is enough for today. There was many more things to come. We only covered 3 verses today, but I had a feeling we wouldn't be able to cover all these things. And we'll have some review next week. Just batten down the hatches for a couple of weeks. It's going to be very deep philosophy, and then it'll make more sense after we hear it over and over again, and it will help us tremendously for the remainder of the Gita as well. So before we close, I just wanted to touch on 2 questions, which are very, very short and won't take more than like a minute. There were 2 questions for today. The first one I couldn't understand, so I'm seeking a little more explanation from the person who sent it. And the other question was just how to get a recording of the chant from the Gita about the prayer, the food prayer, Brahmarpanam. Or it might have been the entire 15th chapter. They didn't specify which one. But both of them, they learned about these from the Amma app. And so my response is that, well, all you have to do is click one button in that app. When you get that Bhojana prayer, I think is what they call it in the app. It's the prayer that we say before meals, and the 15th chapter is the full version that comes before that. Either one, if you click on that, then you'll find that there's a place where you can download the audio and listen to it. And it's very slow, very easy to follow, and you can play it over and over again and you learn from that. That's the best way. So we'll close with the usual prayers. And as always, there's an option of staying on with us for a little while to meditate so we can absorb and assimilate these teachings a little bit more. Om Asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om. Let us meditate for a short while. Check your posture. Try to keep your back and neck relatively straight. Close your eyes and take a few long, deep breaths. Feel the body and mind relaxing further and further with each deep inhalation and exhalation. Try to feel Amma's subtle presence all around you and within you, pervading every bit of you. Now take your awareness to each and every part of your body. Be aware of each and every part, starting from your feet. Be aware of your feet and ankles, shins, your knees and thighs. Be aware of your hips, the lower back and stomach. Be aware of the upper back and the chest. Be aware of your shoulders, your upper arms, your elbows and forearms. Be aware of your hands and all your fingers. Be aware of your neck, your face, and the entire head. Now try to witness the entire body as though you were separate from it, as though you were looking at the body in a mirror. Now we go deeper and witness the breath. Don't participate in the breathing process with your mind. You just watch it. Watch the breath flowing in and out peacefully. The breath is flowing on its own. You are witnessing the breath. Go one step deeper. Instead of witnessing the breath, only be aware of the subtle energy, the prana shakti that flows in, carried by the breath. It's no longer the air or the breath, it's just the energy that is flowing in and out, carried by the vehicle of the breath. Simply witness that. Finally, we no longer witness the energy or anything. We simply witness. You are not witnessing anything in particular. You simply remain in that state of witnessing. We will now conclude the meditation, but try to maintain that feeling of witnessing for as long as you can. Take a deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnaad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. One more long deep breath. And as you exhale, you can slowly open your eyes. Om Namah Shivaya. Thank you for joining us. To see you on Saturday and next week's Gita class on Thursday.